Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good afternoon. You are tuning in to Radio IKIM and the program Man and Nature, produced by Hajah Mazlina Ismail. I'm your host, Sheikh Muhammad Saifuddin and Sheikh Muhammad Saleh from the Center for Science and Environment Studies, Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, IKIM. Inshallah, in today's episode, we have a very interesting topic for discussion, and that topic is sustaining communities, sustaining heritage conservation. And to discuss this topic, I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, Dr. Sharina binti Abdul Halim, who is Deputy Director, Institute for Environment and Development, or Lestari for short, at the University Kebangsaan Malaysia, UKM. Assalamualaikum, Dr. Sharina.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi, Dr. Sheikh.
Thank you for joining us in Man and Nature.
Thank you so much.
I think we can continue with our discussion, Dr. Sharina. Perhaps as an introduction, could you say something about your career so far, focusing on community engagement with heritage?
Okay, so Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And salam sejahtera. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Sheikh for this very kind of invitation to have me on this Man and Nature program on Radio IKIM. So I'm very humble and very happy to be here, and particularly to share with you and with everyone on this topic of sustaining community, sustaining heritage conservation. Because my background is actually an environmental sociologist, so I started the work that I'm doing currently, I would say like for the last 15 years or so, Alhamdulillah. So the work of looking into how to engage community, particularly in heritage conservation, started mostly first in Langkawi, in the Langkawi Island and Langkawi UNESCO Global Geopark. So that work has gave me a platform to pursue my research work in looking into how the fishing communities and their transitional lifestyle as a result of tourism development in the island of Langkawi, and how this transitional situation that the fishing communities had to go through, and how has that affected or impacted on their efforts to protect and conserve their heritage. So that's how I started off with the work that I'm doing in heritage conservation per se. And apart from that, in 2009, I was also involved in a research group called GAMAT, Governance for Heritage Conservation. At that time was led by Al-Rahim Professor Dr. Rahima Abdul Aziz. And from that work, it has introduced me to other areas of conservation. For example, looking into other conservation tools, not just looking into geoparks, but also into World Heritage sites like in Malacca. And we realized that the work of heritage conservation, in order for it to be successful and effective, to address the issues, is by looking at it from a multidisciplinary approach. So being involved in that GAMAT group, Governance for Heritage Conservation, has had, open up other works of looking into addressing heritage in a more multidisciplinary approach. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sharina, for that introduction. I think many of our listeners may not be too familiar when it comes to what we mean by heritage conservation. But perhaps if you can enlighten us, what are the benefits and challenges of engaging communities, as you said earlier that you've been working with the community in Langkawi, for example, with regards to heritage conservation?
Okay, so maybe I'll just give an example so that it's easy to have an analogy, a real example to describe heritage. So for the work that we at Institute for Environment and Development, Lestari at Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, particularly at our Langkawi Research Centre, we work on looking into the conservation of geological, biological, together with cultural heritage. And all of that is to ensure that the community, the local community, together with stakeholders, they are there to conserve this heritage, these three heritage, as I mentioned, the geology, the biology, and culture in an integrated manner, so that it will provide a more sustainable livelihoods. So that through the UNESCO Global Geopark, and as you know that Langkawi is the world-class international tourism destination. So after it was being developed as a mass tourism development, we see that the declining of resources as a result of, at times overcapacity, overutilization. So when Langkawi UNESCO Global Geopark was conferred by UNESCO in 2007, it was an opportunity for us as Malaysian and also worldwide, because this is an international recognition. And Langkawi at that time was bestowed as the first Southeast Asia to be given the recognition as a UNESCO Global Geopark. So it was important to highlight that yes, you can develop, but development also must come with conservation. So that is the main slogan of heritage conservation. It is conservation with development for geopark. It is not an exclusive concept, but rather an inclusive. It brings people together. It does not exclude or isolate people while we are trying to conserve the geology, the biology, and the natural resources. So the benefit is very needs to be clearly addressed, because again, while people are trying to develop, people tend to see what is it in for me. So the benefits of it is, I would say, have to come at various level, not only for the local communities, but also it has to have a benefit for the decision and policymakers, and also for the private sectors and practitioners on the island. So on the island of Langkawi, we have to show that tourism development is the main income generating sector, but how can conservation of these heritage resources will be something that can be in harmony, in line. So Langkawi is unique, outstanding, universal value for us in Malaysia that we need to know, because it is 550 million years of geological age, and this is actually where Malaysia is from. And I think this is something important for us to identify, because this relates to where we come from, the origin of our country, Malaysia, from the island of Langkawi. So the benefits must be a win-win situation for the community, for the decision maker and policymakers, as well as for the private sectors and other stakeholders, so that they feel that they have to be part of this heritage conservation, to increase, efforts to achieve sustainable development goals by working together. So working together in a cooperative and collaborative manner. So these are the kind of benefits that we are trying to show while we are protecting our heritage resources. We can develop, but we need to see how it will benefit everybody in the long run.
I think what you mentioned is basically the role that mankind has to play as Khalifah or vicegerent or steward in managing our resources in a sustainable manner. I can only
Yeah.
imagine the challenge that you face when it comes to trying to harmonize between development and also conservation. This is not something that can be done, but based on your observation, Dr. Sharina,
Mm.
Which community are more acceptable to be actively involved when it comes to managing heritage conservation?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shi. So that is actually quite a hard question to answer, really, to be honest. Perhaps in theory it's much easy, but in the practical sense, in reality, there's a lot of challenges in trying to ensure the full, comprehensive, holistic um, engagement by the community, especially in managing heritage conservation. The reason why I'm saying this is because that while we are concerned that when we want to engage community in heritage conservation, as I mentioned earlier, that it needs to be done in a collaborative and cooperative manner. But it's also important to understand the kind of values, the kind of practices, and the overall behavior that the community as well as the stakeholder has towards managing this heritage. And oftentimes that community are involved, but not at all levels. Sometimes community are involved in a sense that most like a checklist. Okay, so how to ensure that to make sure that the community will be able to engage truly and fully in heritage conservation is that we need to identify the community that responds to the kind of work that we are doing, particularly in managing the resources together, because it is about their everyday lives. So when we talk about the everyday lives of the community, we cannot say that when we want to conserve, for example, we want to conserve the rock, then we want to conserve the flora and fauna. It has to be something that is connected to their everyday activities. And so they will ask, how is it going to benefit me? Right? If I conserve that, how is it going to be something that will be able to sustain my livelihoods? Right? So this is something that we need to have a lot of discussion with the local communities, and most importantly, at the very early beginning of the process, we already need to involve them, and we already need to identify the key person, the leader. Yeah, so having already to be able to do that from the very beginning will be able to ensure that, okay, this community will be able to actively participate because they are clear from the very beginning why they need to do this. So for example, in Langkawi, I share with you, in Kilimkas Geoforest Park, it is a conservation area but also an ecotourism area, where the local community, they are actually fishermen, fishing
Mm.
cooperative group. But now the fishing cooperative group have been able to transform and diversify their livelihoods, and they become boat owners, boat operators, tour guides, because they know that in that area there's outstanding geological resources, biological resources, cultural resources that they need to protect while they are doing their ecotourism activities. So it's much easier when they feel like, oh, there is in something for me that I need to protect, and the kind of leadership and the kind of direction that they have to be able to participate effectively in a collaborative manner. So it's something that when it touches their heart, so when they see that they have a role to play, they see that the kind of responsibility that they have to amanah, kan, the amanah that they can together take care of the heritage resources, then I think that would be something that we can start with before we go on to increase greater awareness and participation in other pockets of the society. Yeah. Mhm.
I can see that much work has to be done with regards to trying to convince the community to be part of heritage conservation, and I'm sure part of it also involves capacity building. Now, how can we be more successful in building capacity for local ownership and also for leadership of heritage conservation projects, as well as improving participation when it comes to decisions and also in practice as well?
Okay. So, Alhamdulillah, thank you, Dr. Shia. Actually, I'm just part of this whole team. The work that has been done, that I have been involved, was just only for the last 15 years, but actually the work of the team at Lestari, especially under great leadership for Langkawi UNESCO Global Geopark, it would be under Professor Emeritus Dr. Ibrahim Komo. And from that kind of direction, right, when you mention about building capacity, and again, uh, that sort of capacity building process, especially for the local community, or for the indigenous community, is first, as I mentioned earlier to you, is that we need to engage them from the very beginning. And then we need to inform them, increase their awareness that they are doing this heritage conservation. That is also part and parcel of their everyday lives. But what is extra here is that you are doing extraordinary things, because you're not just doing your everyday activities to ensure you can sustain your livelihood, you can have a sustainable income generation, but you are doing extraordinary things that would matter to you, matters to them, because they are living in the heritage site, right? um, like in Langkawi UNESCO Global Geopark, Malacca and Penang World Heritage Site, in Tasik Chini Man and Biosphere Reserve. These are all heritage. And how they can feel that, oh, okay, how can we play our role when we are small? But that is what matters, because the sustainability action from them is coming from the bottom up. So I'm not saying that top down is not important. It's also important, but it matters when the ownership is coming from bottom up, that they feel that they are sprouting this local, this sustainable activity, it could be an entrepreneurship, it could be a cooperative, and that sort of activities together to protect the heritage resources. So it is also in the larger picture of how to increase their capacity, is to say that whilst you are doing this, you are actually raising your quality of life and your livelihoods. So that is something that I think is very important, to have the kind of leadership, to have the kind of direction that the community feel that they can play a role, even though the role is small, and to engage the community from both bottom up as well as top down. So that kind of empowering process is very important, because oftentimes we do not highlight enough the appreciation that we have, and the respect that we have towards the local knowledge, towards the indigenous knowledge, especially in heritage conservation, right? So because this, it has to be something that is close to your heart, because like people like us, we are researchers, we are not really living in the site per se, right? We're just doing our work there years on. But the people who are there, the local community, as you mentioned, Dr. Shay, the custodian, the Khalifa of that site, of that area, it is important for them to feel that the appreciation towards their knowledge in managing this heritage together with people from the decision makers, policy makers, and people like us coming from the university, from the research institutions, the scientific evidence to show that why the importance to build the capacity and the ownership in a participatory manner, so that this heritage um, can be protected in a sustainable manner, right? Because at the moment, the kind of narrative that we have out there is that um, about dollars and cents, right? If we protect this, how much is it going to be um, earned by the state, for example, right? So yes, it's important also in that sense. I'm not saying dollars and cents are not important. I'm just saying that the narrative has also to be inculcated nowadays, especially in our present and future generations, is that we need to move beyond monetary incentives. We need to move into transforming the behavior towards empowering the capacity of the communities to value and appreciate and respect the heritage resources that they have. So, yeah,
Inshallah. I believe
Allah,
there's much work. There's much work still needs to be done with regards to
yes,
heritage conservation. But I think just throwing an idea to you, Doctor, perhaps one of the things or one of the approach that we can perhaps introduce is, to create the awareness that heritage conservation is part and parcel of our religious duties, especially for Muslims, because this is also our responsibility, as we've mentioned earlier, as Khalifa of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala on this planet. So you yourself have been involved with this endeavor for the past 15 years. So, what are the lessons learned from your observation so far in sustaining heritage conservation through the efforts of engaging the local communities?
yes. MashaAllah. Yeah. I think the most important lesson so far. Yes. Then I would like to quote from Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, where he stated that yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world, but today I am wise, so I am changing myself. So in the pursuit of understanding how to engage community effectively in heritage conservation, I think the most important lessons that I've learned is that communities that are coming from different environmental and social settings have shown such great as how do you say hopes and these people, they are coming from different condition at different levels, yeah, even in situation of poverty, even in situation of environmental degradation or environmental crisis, or sometimes they feel the kind of disempowerment in this pursuit towards having conservation with development in the context of uh, heritage conservation. But Alhamdulillah, inshallah, we see that even amidst all these great challenges, all of the experiences from the community have taught me that um, everybody are resonating a common feeling of solidarity, of coming together to do their part, even it's so small, uh, in these conservation efforts. So that people feel that there is no situation that we cannot solve if we put our hearts together, our hearts and our minds together, inshallah. So that's something that I think, like Dr. Shi mentioned, there's so much work still to be done. But when you feel that you work with the communities at the ground, at the grassroots level, that even they are faced with great challenges, they still feel that there is still something more, and there is always hope for us to be working together in order to push forward voices or push forward the agenda to increase the awareness, to make sure that people are in and able to participate in changing um, the kind of transformative behavior that we mentioned just now, as how we look our heritage resources, be it nature or cultural, together as an integrative resources, so that is how we would like to see that this is coming together to provide sustainability for the communities as well as for the heritage um, as a whole. Yeah. So that's
Inshallah.
something that I feel.
Inshallah. And Doctor, perhaps one last question as conclusion. I would imagine that for many of our listeners, the term or the phrase heritage conservation is perhaps new to them. So, what would be your suggestions to our listeners with regards to creating and also increasing our awareness of the importance of heritage conservation? because the example that you have given is primarily based on your involvement in Langkawi.
Mm-hmm.
But I would imagine when it comes to heritage conservation, it's not just about certain places like Langkawi or Georgetown or Tasik Chini or Malacca. It has to be something that we do everywhere in the country. So, what would be your suggestions to our listeners? As ways for us to increase our effort in conserving our heritage, which, as you say, not just includes the natural heritage like geological and biological, but also involves cultural heritage.
Yes. Um, True. There is actually a lot of discoveries to be made still. Yeah. And in terms of how we can get involved, I think we can always start from our small unit of our family. So the appreciation and the respect towards heritage should come from our smallest unit, which is our family. And that, children, parents, extended families should highlight how the heritage of their family. So from that appreciation, it can goes beyond. Okay, my family has a heirloom, has a heritage where I come from, and why is that important? To be strengthened, to be empowered, not just for for your family, but I also think it helps in terms of building and strengthening identity and also promoting values that we have in our family, and that kind of thing can go beyond, because like Dr. Shea saying, when we're talking about heritage resources, especially when it's not something that is close to our heart, it's very difficult, right? And getting ourselves through reading, of course, through involving ourselves in a lot of there's a lot of NGOs out there that are doing this. For example, like in Langkawi, they have their Friends of Langkawi Geopark. That, and that's not just for people who lives in Langkawi. That's for people who support the agenda, um, the you know the the mission to protect heritage resources together. So there's actually a lot of things that we can do if we open our hearts to the possibilities of getting ourselves to know more about heritage conservation, especially in our country.
Inshallah. I believe that nicely wraps up our discussion, Dr. Sharina. How time flies, it's already nearly 30 minutes of Man and Nature for this week.
Yes,
The topic has been very interesting and I believe an eye opener for many of us. This is perhaps something new to many of our listeners. I myself have learned a lot from our discussion. And for that, I'd like to express my gratitude to Dr. Sharina for being on air with me in this episode of Man and Nature. Our topic, inshallah, has been is of great benefit. The discussion has been of great benefit to everyone listening. Hopefully, we'll meet again on the air for another round of discussion in the future. And I'd like to say again to express my gratitude to you for joining me today. Inshallah, the Men in Asia will be on air again next week for another topic. Thank you again, Dr. Sharina. Until we meet again, stay tuned to Radio IKIM, Inspirasi Inforia Islami. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.